Good afternoon, and welcome to the Voice of Wisdom. With over 60 years of experience as an investment banker, entrepreneur, investment analyst, economist, and venture capitalist, Morty Davis is Wall Street and capitalism personified. The over 400 companies for which he has raised more than $3 billion over the years have created a countless number of jobs and exciting new products. Through the Voice of Wisdom, Mr. Davis explores, analyzes, and debates the most topical political, economic, and social issues facing our world today. Joining Mr. Davis for a discussion on war is Rabbi David Seidemann. To join the conversation, please call 332-263-3300. That's 332-263-3300. And now, Mr. Davis and Rabbi Seidemann.
First of all, welcome back. It's a delight to be with you again, 6:30 every Wednesday. I look forward to your wisdom. I offer whatever wisdom I have available to me. I must tell you, as Len Katz, my number one guy for the last 30 years in my organization, I think it's 30 years, right, Len? Introduces me. He leaves out that I'm working harder today than I ever worked before. And in fact, I'm working on the most exciting, intriguing, and worthwhile project I ever worked on. And I worked on a lot of biotech and pharma deals that helped cure different aspects of illness and health intrusions, pandemics, every kind of thing. And I haven't cured them all or cured an overwhelming amount of them. But I did help. I did a deal for, I may have mentioned this before, for, what's his name? The guy who got the Nobel Prize for curing polio, Jonas Salk. Jonas Salk. And I did it for a number of people at Harvard that were were awarded Nobel Prizes, and all kind of really great things that impacted positively human health. But the most exciting one I ever worked on is currently in the process, and that's the cure for cancer, for the prevention of cancer, and hopefully the total elimination of cancer. It's well along. It's led by a fellow who has received proposals twice or two or three times for Nobel Prize, and has won every other prize in medicine that one could think of. So I'm so excited to be involved with that project. His name is O'Malley, Dr. O'Malley. He's the chancellor of the Baylor University Medical School. And he's a real genius, and he has a team that's unbelievable. They've been working together 40 years. And it seems to be real, it seems to work. If you want to know more about it, I'll be glad to discuss it. But the program today is about war. And not going to war, or going to war, or what we could do to prevent this horrendous behavior on the part of human beings. We supposedly have become more civilized over the generations, and yet we can carry on this barbaric behavior. We take our young people, send them to the front lines with the most horrendous weapons, the most devastating weapons, to kill other nice young men on the other side that realistically they don't know or they don't even hate. But their leaders, the country's leaders, send them off to war, and they're told to kill as many as fast as they can. It's horrendous, and I can't believe we still behave that. It still exists, particularly since the United States Constitution only grants to Congress the sole power to declare war. And yet we've been in 11 wars and has only voted to declare war 11 times. We've been in way more than 11 wars. But only 11 times has Congress gotten involved and approved declared war, with the most recent being during World War II, where there was some great justification because we were actually attacked, although not on our own land. The closest we came was we were attacked at Pearl Harbor. Our troops were surprised, but we were not physically attacked. But at least we had a justification because one Sunday morning we frighteningly attacked, and President Roosevelt declared World War II. So before I discuss war any further, just let me interject and say that I should bring up the most current issue on the table affecting our lives, and that is the recent election results that came in. We addressed it briefly last Wednesday, but the results weren't in yet. It was late Tuesday that they started to come in. Tuesday was the election day. And now we know somewhat more what the results are and what the consequences were. And I can't believe that none of the pollsters would realize what, I'm not the biggest genius in the world or the most aware person in the world, but the minute Roe Wade was rejected, I said that the Republicans selected a Supreme Court that's going to give the election overwhelmingly to the Democrats. And in fact, the Democrats won the Senate, where they were supposed to an interim election, after 2 years after the president was elected. Historically, there's an overwhelming vote against the president, almost without exception. In one case, Obama lost, I think, 64 congressmen 2 years after he was elected. The other big number was George Bush, the father, I think, had 54 congressional members of the House of Representatives and the Senate overturned. Democrats elected while he was a Republican. So that's been something you could count on way back. Clinton lost. Len's just pointing out that Len lost a lot too after his first 2 years. And it was supposed to be a red runaway, red being the Republicans' runaway, and overturn maybe 50 or more Democrats, kicked out and replaced by Republicans. And yet the Democrats picked up so far 1 seat and maybe 2 seats in the Senate, and they did get beat in the House of Representatives, but it's still not settled. But it's no more than about 5, 6, or 7, which was amazing. and I feel strongly that if the election had taken place 2 weeks earlier, the Democrats would have won the House as well, because the issue of abortion, while it was still dominant, there are more women than men in this country, and that issue of abortion for the women and their young people in general, and particularly young ladies, was so taken aback and so angry by the Supreme Court's overturning Roe Wade that they came out to vote intensely and compulsively, dedicatingly to vote against the Republicans. But what changed it, since it took a few more weeks, is the Republicans wised up and started hitting with, the biggest issue was inflation and crime and immigration. And so some of the women that were going to vote for the number one issue in their minds, abortion, were somewhat influenced by this dramatic attack on these other issues. So I just don't understand how I was able to realize that. And I'm not patting myself on the back. I'm just saying the pollsters are seemingly a waste of time because they actually interview the people and check with them, and they come out with the wrong conclusions. So now let me go back to war. And let me have Rabbi Dr. Seidemann give his views of war. I'm totally against it. I'm saying it should be outlawed and eliminated as behavior. And he comes with a fresh point of view, including the Torah's, the Old Testament's point of view, and also the commentaries over the view, great scholars and their view about war. So why don't I let you get a word in edgewise?
Oh, thank you. I almost fell asleep here. Oh, great. Thank you. Well, I just want to, if I could spend 1 second on the election as well. I think that there's one other issue that drove the vote. I agree with you 100% that abortion drove the vote. That brought out the women in droves. I think that Biden's student loan forgiveness to college-age students or people that have since graduated college, took out loans, which has since been declared unconstitutional, and they've canceled that program now, or they've frozen it. That brought out a lot of the youth as well. That's the Democratic playbook, the giveaways. So
yeah, but that should have increased.
No, that increased the Democratic vote. It did. There was a lot of people between the ages of 24 and 29 that voted, and that's because of the student loans. I think the Republicans fell short. I think they fell short because you can't just say there's something wrong with the Democrats. You have to have a plan for yourself of your own to solve some of the problems. And I think when pressed, the Republicans didn't have a plan. They didn't articulate one. They simply said their way's not working. But Americans are smarter, and Americans know the problems. They want to hear the solutions.
What do you mean they didn't have a plan? I heard over and over again Tucker Carlson and many of the hosts on
Fox News.
Fox News say the best plan they had was to arrest Biden for
okay. Well, that's not much of a plan.
For confiscating the presidency when
right. Well, that's
he clearly lost, and also because he's incompetent because he keeps slipping and falling.
Okay, that's not a good plan. That's not a good plan. Ron DeSantis won because Ron DeSantis is a figure to be reckoned with, and I don't think a lot of the other Republican candidates that were running brought as much to the table as needed to be brought to the table. But we're here to talk about war, and politics is war, but we're here to talk about a different type of war. Now, war is part of the human condition. The basis of war...
Does it have to be?
It doesn't have to be, because war comes from a warped sense of reality that you have something that belongs to me. That normally is the genesis of all war. I mean, just let's not start at the beginning of time. Let's start now. Yeah. The Ukraine-Russian conflict. It started because Putin believed that Ukraine had something, i.e. their territory, that either belonged to him or shouldn't belong to them. So the genesis of most war is ego and jealousy. And you find it on within individual relationships, Cain and Abel, right? first two brothers in the world, and what does one do? One kills the other because apparently God liked your sacrifice better than mine. There's that jealousy. You have a certain recognition that I don't have. You have something. You have dad's favor or mom's favor that I don't have. So you find it on an individual level, and then you find it on a nation-to-nation level. So I think that if you recognize at the outset that jealousy is a component of the human condition, and until you get rid of that jealousy, there will be war, there will be strife. And ego is a condition, part of the human condition, and until a person learns to supplement and to subdue their ego, there's going to be war. But I think you have to distinguish between defensive wars and offensive wars. I agree with you, Morty, that offensive wars should cease. No excuse, never an excuse to take something that doesn't belong to you, to be jealous of somebody else's lot in life to the effect that you're going to steal it from them either quietly or with force. But you have to distinguish between an offensive war, a defensive war, and an offensive war. Now, a defensive war recognizes, I spoke about what is part of the human condition, jealousy and rage and ego, but evil is also part of the human condition. There are evil people. Now, a lot of liberals won't recognize that. A lot of conservatives won't recognize that. There is something in this world called evil, and the more woke we get, the less we tend to recognize evil. People on the street with guns, that's a war. In other words, Morty, when you said war should be outlawed, I assumed you're talking about nation to nation. But spend a weekend in Chicago. That's a war. Anytime somebody picks up a weapon and is violent, that is a war.
Internal war should be definitely eliminated.
Right. So the answer to eliminating war, when you have
listen very carefully. This comes from on high.
Yes, this is the real voice of wisdom. Right. I know Morty gets a 20-minute introduction, and he's the voice of wisdom. What am I? What am I the voice of?
Okay,
what am I the voice of?
Now you're listening to the real voice of wisdom. Not only his own wisdom, but the biblical wisdom and the scholarly wisdom.
Yeah, but now I forgot what I was going to say. Okay, the way, since you're not going to get rid of jealousy and you're not going to get rid of ego, the way to get rid of war, if you can, is to de-incentivize it. In other words, you have to make the aggressor pay such a price that aggressor will not start up again, and other nations won't follow that lead. For instance, in yesterday's news, the immediate news was that Russian missiles landed in Poland. Now, since that initial report, they backtracked a little bit, and even Biden said, based on the trajectory, we're not sure. Well, Poland didn't shoot it at themselves, and there's been no other indication that it came from any other country, but let's assume there has been
that it came from Ukraine.
That it came from Ukraine. Okay, so that's a report I didn't
see.
See, that's why you're the voice of wisdom.
What what do you call it? The suspicion that initially that it came from Russia was it was Russian missiles.
Oh, so maybe Ukraine had the Russian missiles. Okay, could be, but my point's the following: what was the reaction? The reaction from the NATO alliance was, well, this invokes the Article of Defense. An attack on one is attack on all.
Right. Could have let war break out in a world war.
Right, but nobody within those first 24 hours said this was an attack on Poland. We're joining the fight. They didn't do that. Right. I'm not saying they should have under the circumstances because it was unclear where the missiles came from. But can you imagine if it was clear that it came from Russia and the entirety of the civilized world said, that's it, Russia. We're now coming after you. So that would be a deterrent to to other nations in the future being aggressive. And the same thing on a country that's very dear to my heart and your heart, and that is Israel. Biblically, there were two types of wars. There was a war that was a mitzvah, a commandment, and a war that was called a permissible war. Now, the war that was commanded was in the time of Joshua, and that was the initial conquest of the land of Israel. The 7 nations, the non-Jewish nations that would then make up the land of Israel. Mm-hmm. So that was what was called a milchemet mitzvah. That was a mitzvah. Everybody had to fight in it, and you didn't need the great Sanhedrin, the high court, to approve it. And then there was something called a milchemet reshut, not a compulsory war, but a permissive war. And those were the wars that were fought in the time of King David. And those were the wars that were fought to expand the kingdom or for economic reasons. And for there, you needed, as we said before, the Constitution, Congress has the power to declare war. In order for King David or subsequent kings to engage in what was called a offensive war, right? You would need the Sanhedrin, the great council of sages, to approve of that war. So the question then becomes, in modern times, where there is no Sanhedrin, we don't have this high court anymore, how does the country or the land of Israel, the Jewish people, engage in any war? If only those wars to initially conquer the 7 countries or peoples that were inhabiting what now is the land of Israel was obligatory, and everything else you needed permission from the high court, how do we engage in, how does Israel engage in any wars today? So there Maimonides, the Rambam, explains that, and others, the Maharal, that any war that is defensive in nature falls into the category of an offense, of a permitted war, of a war that's a mitzvah. So when you talk about, what about if the war is not imminent, but Israel wants to act to deter bad actors in the region? So there Maimonides says the same thing. That also would be a mitzvah. That would also be a commandment. So this goes back to the point I was making before. You need to seek out evil and get rid of it, and that will stop most wars. I want to make one other point, and that is to touch on something you said before, and it's true. It's these 18 and 19 and 20-year-old kids who really don't have a beef with who they're killing. They're killing other 18 and 19, 20-year-old kids. They're sent to kill and be killed.
They don't even
by
know
people.
them.
They don't know them.
They might like the guy.
Right.
They might be friends with them if they knew them.
They're sent to kill and be killed by people sitting in Washington, D.C. that are in their 60s
and
or
to
70s.
kill as effectively and massively as they could.
And listen how the Jewish religion treats war. The Jewish law is, the Maharal says, that when a Jewish army conquers a city, in 99.9% of the situations, they're not allowed to kill the inhabitants. You have to give them food, water. You have to give them the chance to surrender. And the only way you can even kill a prisoner is if it's determined that he, A, could escape, and will pose a danger in the future. So A, it's the way we fight wars, which is horrific, and B, it's the human condition that gets us into the wars, but that human condition is a lot harder to change than it is to get a unified front to stamp out evil. Jealousy and ego will always be there, but to stand up in the face of evil, and I was thinking today, and then I'll let you cut in because this is the longest I've ever spoken sitting next to you, and I apologize.
No problem.
But I was thinking today, it's if you're anti-black these days, you're canceled. If you're anti-gay, you're canceled. You're anti-transgender, you're canceled. If you're an anti-Semite, no problem. No problem. There's an evil in the world. There's lots of evils in the world, anti-this, anti-that, and they're all being dealt with. But anti-Semitism just seems to be growing and growing. It's Saturday Night Live had a whole comedy sketch on it this past Saturday night, and they get a pass. You can be anti-Semitic and get a pass. That's what happens when you don't root out evil. You want to root out war, you have to root out evil.
Shannon Taylor is on. Let's hear from Shannon Taylor, and then I want to respond to some of what Rabbi Seidemann just talked about, deterrence and the justification for starting a war, particularly with Ukraine. So let me take Shannon Taylor, and then I'd like to respond to your dialogue. Shannon, what's your view?
Good morning, my dear friend. I want to get back to the war in Ukraine. I want to know how a nation that collaborated with the Nazis in handing over and murdering Jews, as in Babi Yar, is something that we should ever go and get involved with in defending. And especially when the nation attacking it is also an enemy of the Jews, but at the time was more friendly to Israel than Ukraine. That just proved what it thinks when it voted that Israel doesn't belong there.
So are you asking how the United
I'm asking Morty.
No, I just want to crystallize the question. Do you mean how does the United States support that, or how does Israel support that?
How does both United States and Israel?
Okay.
Where is our concern to go and defend the collaborators of Nazis who've killed Jews since the 1600s and have the nerve to vote against us all the time, and yet ask for our help? And how stupid are we to give it?
Shannon, I think you feel pretty strongly about that. What do you really feel? Now, look, in a sense, you're accurate. There were a lot of Jews slaughtered by Ukraine and as well as in Russia, both. Stalin killed millions and millions of Jews. Jews are easy to pick on. Even Jews pick on Jews. They always say when there's two Jews, there's three opinions, And there's one guy on an island alone, a Jewish guy on an island alone, and he's got two synagogues. They said, "What are you doing? You're the only one on the island. Well, how come you have two synagogues?" He said, "Oh, that's the one I don't go to." He's got to be.
Well, I don't go to either.
Okay, so that's yours. I'm not taking issue with any of your religious behavior, but anyway, there's only one thing that two Jews can never agree upon. You know what that is? There's only one.
Yeah, that they're stupid.
No.
They're suicidal.
No, don't get hostile.
They help their enemies and not themselves.
Don't get hostile. There's only one thing that two Jews always agree upon. It's how much a third Jew should give, donate. That they could agree upon. Anyway, look, I understand where you're coming from. There's a lot of residual anger and hatred because many of our families, my families, your families, my father's family for sure, very few survived in Poland or in Hungary. My mother was from Poland. My father was from Hungary. And even the natives there didn't take issue with the Nazis necessarily. A lot of them grabbed...
Well, they helped them.
Yeah, no.
They helped them. It was the Cossacks from Ukraine.
Yeah.
It was one area, Poland, Belarus, and Ukraine.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't accept them into the resistance, and they turned them over to the Nazis.
Okay. Anyway,
Demajuk is the best example recently, and then we go. Then they cry for the Jew, and as soon as while they're crying, they're saying at the United Nations we don't deserve our own country.
okay. Thank you for the call, and I appreciate your strong feelings, and in many respects, they're certainly justified. But let me get back.
God bless you, Morty, and your family.
God bless you all, and God bless everyone in this audience, and God bless every human being. I hope we can overcome wars and abusing each other and torturing each other and killing each other. But I want to refer back to what Rabbi Seidemann said. One, he used the word deterrence. And, you know, the United States is the major supposed example of deterrence, because we build up our military equipment, both defensive and offense. It's interesting, we only have a defense budget. We don't have an offense budget, but most of it is offensive. It's to kill other people. But so we say that deters war, because we're so loaded with military equipment and offensive equipment, and anybody that might start up with us would be in big trouble. So that deters their coming up against us. Notwithstanding that, or maybe because of that, we spend more on defense than almost all the other countries in the world put together. They spend a little more, all the other countries, than we spend, the United States spends itself. And interestingly enough, with all that deterrence, we are the most belligerent. We've been involved in more wars, particularly since the end of the Second World War, than any country in the world. After the Second World War, we were involved in a Korean War. I don't know why. It's a part of the country. Monroe said we should just stick to defending this part of the world that we're in, North and South America. It was called the Monroe Doctrine. Don't get involved in foreign wars. That was his warning to us. Eisenhower, when he left his presidency during his 8 years, even though he was a military man, God bless him, never entered a war. And won his people, usually when his presidents finish 4 years or 8 years, they talk about what a great job they did, how they kept the peace, and how they improved the society. And they talk about their track record. Eisenhower spoke about one thing. He said, be careful, be forewarned of the power of the military-industrial complex, because you'll notice that the defense budget goes up every year. They said after the Cold War ended, we're going to have a big dividend, peace dividend, because we'll spend much less on military equipment, on war equipment, and we'll be able to use it for good things like improving society's poverty situation, or improving the health of our country, doing research on all the diseases that kill every one of us, the congressmen, the senators, the presidents. Few of us are ever going to get killed by an attack of a terrorist. Yes, we lost 3,000 people 9/11, but we went, counter that, we went to war of Afghanistan, and we lost enormous treasure and blood and valuable young people that for the next 50 years they'll be in only recently the last of the soldiers of our American soldiers in the Second World War passed away at their military, at the veterans hospitals. So it's not the war, the price doesn't end the day the war ends. We pay for it for years and years and years. And I'm not even talking about the aggravation to the families and to the ones that suffered that devastation, the guys that are crippled, maimed, blinded. So you say, Craig, Ukraine was justified maybe for us to intrude. And I take great issue with that for several reasons. Just like I take great issue with Taiwan and our intruding in that. Because if you notice, before the breakup of Russia, Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union, as were all these other countries. So you could say they have some claim to those territories. They gave it up, so maybe they don't have a claim. But they were part of, just like the European Union is now made up of many countries that were separate before. So that's Putin's view, that these were part of Soviet Union, and he's reclaiming at least part of them. I'm not defending his position or not, but I will take issue in this sense. Putin, before he went to war, he started this war, said to the United States and to Ukraine and to NATO, if you exclude Ukraine from joining NATO, I won't start the war. Okay? So, at the very least, the United States should have met with him. Biden should have met with Putin, just as Trump met with him in the past, and we meet with our biggest enemies. Trump met with the head of North Korea, who's a terrible guy. He met with various major enemies, try to get a peaceful settlement. So and we didn't need Ukraine and NATO. There were, I think, 40 countries already. Ukraine wanted to be part of it so they could get the protection. But if we said, okay, at least give them the chance to prove that that's true, we could still be back to the same square one. If he violates that, we're going to come, and you tell him that. Okay, we're going to accept your premise, your promise that you won't attack Ukraine, and we'll make a pledge that we won't let Ukraine join NATO. But instead, that was not a big risk, it was not a big sacrifice, and it might have worked. At least that much diplomacy you could try to avoid a war that could turn into a world war and that could turn into a nuclear war. But we didn't even make that minimal investment.
Right.
It's true that what's-his-name came back from meeting with Hitler and Neville Chamberlain, and he gave them what they wanted. I forget what it was called. It was like part of Czechoslovakia and some longer name. And he said, I gave Hitler these properties. They said, okay. And he promised that'll bring peace forever.
Right, there was no diplomatic path undertaken in this Ukraine.
There was no minimal effort.
Correct.
And the next thing, we're at war and losing lives and treasure.
Right.
And the same with what do you call it? Taiwan was part of China.
Right. Well, technically, we're not at war in Ukraine now. We're giving them a boatload of.
We're at war. If Russia attacked the United States for what they're doing on behalf of Ukraine,
Okay, but we're not there.
We would be complicit, if not totally.
Okay, but the flip side.
And the same as with Taiwan. What right do we have to say to China? That's not part of China. It was part of China. You weren't alive during that time, but Chiang Kai-shek, particularly his wife, was a big hero in the Second World War. And at the end of the war, he took offense because he lost, Chiang Kai-shek, and he set up a separate country, Taiwan.
I think that part of it is that, we live in a global economy now. So, if two tribes are fighting in the Congo, that we're not worried that that's going to affect our economic security. But if you have two big nations, even if they're on the other side of the ocean, and they're involved in a war, that leads to a trade war, and that leads
We shouldn't be. We're not the. offers the cup of the world.
Okay, that's
We shouldn't make the judgment that we're right and they're wrong. We should try diplomacy, and if it doesn't work, we should try bribery. And if that still doesn't work, then we shouldn't go to lose our people's lives. We should adhere to the Monroe Doctrine. Or we should set up a function. If you look, there's a guy, an archaeologist, who preaches an end to all wars. And he says, we got to find a way to do it. At the very least, if somebody starts a war and without provocation, without justification, then they should go through a Nuremberg trial and know at the end that the leaders will be hung by their...
Right. But that's what I was saying before. You need the world to unite against evil. And hopefully one day... war is evil. Offensive wars are evil.
I don't want to be that... evil is... One man's evil is another man's good deed, I'm saying wars, we know wars, nobody wins the wars, right?
Nobody wins.
We had all these wars, Korean War, then we had the...
Look how long we were bogged down in the Vietnam War.
We're still in the Korean War. We still don't have peace in the Korean War.
Right.
Did you know we didn't sign a peace treaty? And we still have troops in South Korea?
We're not going to get drafted though, are we? We're a little bit too old, I think, right?
Well...
Maybe you though, too.
I'm advocating.
I got 5 feet.
That's the only ones that should be drafted. People over 65. At least they live most of their lives, and furthermore.
And we don't fight after 7 p.m. because we're sleeping.
What do you mean? We don't fight before 3 p.m. or 2 p.m.
Right. We wake up.
If the guy's running away, we'd rather sit down and take a nap.
Exactly.
So the damage is limited, and the rewards would be great because the wives would say, "Oh, my husband." Instead of he died of cancer or he's got Alzheimer's, he just got a Purple Heart. He was shot in a war.
Right.
I have a purple. Or even if they died, not today, they get a gold star if their son or their brother or member of the family. So that's what they got to show instead of the valuable human being that was there. But this way, if the guy was 90 and I got a gold star, she could really be proud of him. He died a hero.
But Morty, we're also living in a society that glorifies violence. Forget about war. That's two countries fighting over borders, territories, or economics.
That's my issue. That is the evil.
Right.
We shouldn't do that. We should make it so that it's so
costly,
so barbaric.
Right.
So I like to think that over the years we become more developed, more intelligent, more considerate, more unselfish.
Right, but what we've done...
Cain and Abel was, early in our development.
Right, what we've done is we've perfected ways to kill more people without killing ourselves, by fighting from afar with lasers and all kinds of other inventions. But the concept of you would think that the more sophisticated we become, the more it would be abhorrent to us to kill another human being.
No, particularly the United States. We hold ourselves as above the rest of the world. We think we're so perfect.
Right, but we claim we're doing it in the name of democracy. You see, we say that when we go to war, we're freeing the people.
It doesn't matter what we say.
Yeah, I understand.
Our activity says we start things that are going to kill people, a lot of innocent people, and what most tragically our very own people. How much treasure and how much blood did we lose in Afghanistan?
Yeah.
And what do we have to show for it?
Right.
The only thing, the war we had that we won in the last, is it 100 years since? Not yet, since the end of the Second World War. About 85 years. The only war we won was, we didn't win North Korea, it's not over. We certainly didn't win Vietnam.
No.
Not over. We got a lot of residual damage, hurt and pain and maladies and destruction.
Yeah.
Destruction. So that's Vietnam was terrible. After Vietnam, we had Iraq, and after Iraq, we had Afghanistan. It's just never ending.
And it's endless. what I can't wrap my head around is that there seems to be such a divide between what we tolerate in war, which is endless, senseless killing without rules or regulations, and yet, and that's okay. Kill as many as you can, as quickly as you can. But when it comes to dealing with violent crime here in America, we have a completely opposite point of view. There was just a decision today or yesterday. There was a gentleman driving on the Belt Parkway. This happened a year and a half, 2 years ago. On drugs, high, cocaine in the car. He had been in jail for murder or attempted murder before, and he killed a young man, a young father, who was I think in his 40s. And the guy had, another 40, 50 years to live. And he was sentenced today. This guy who was high on drugs, alcohol, and killed somebody was sentenced to 5 to 15 years in jail. And the family went berserk. How does that... So again, when it comes to war, drop a bomb on as many people as you can. We have to root out not even evil, because the people that are fighting are not evil. They're sent there by others that might be evil. But when it comes to dealing with a known criminal, somebody who killed a father because he was driving on the Belt Parkway at 94 miles an hour, so he'll be out.
What do you mean? I can't believe that we, with our high standards and our claim to perfection and this Constitution and everything, are the worst people in the world in terms of domestic killing.
Dealing with the
All because of our own Constitution, and the NRA. And I still don't know where this interpretation comes from. In the Torah it says you don't have one extra. Every word means something.
Right.
There's no extra words. If you see an extra word, you got to.
There's a reason. You have to figure it out. What does it mean? Why is it there?
What's the implications? Right. And yet, in our Constitution, it says a well-armed militia, every man, woman, and child, or every citizen, or what's the exact language, is allowed to
bear arms, the right to bear arms. Right.
Now, what's the words there? What is it? Ed, a well-armed militia. So it must mean that it's within the framework of well-armed militia, because that's how we overcame the British.
Right.
So that makes sense.
Right. On its face, it doesn't seem to confer.
And the NRA says it's become such a holy thing, the right to bear arms. And Donald Trump Jr. said that's his favorite sport, shooting, hunting. It's such a. In Judaism, you're not allowed to do that.
Right.
Why aren't you allowed to do that? Because it's such an unfair contest, you and the animal. And if you were sure you were going to eat it and do it for your food, then you're allowed to do it.
Right, but sport hunting, right.
And you may just wound the animal, and he runs off and suffers for years and years.
Right.
And still we make it, they're going to take away the guns from hunters. I'm not in favor of taking away the guns from hunters, it's hard enough. But to take them away from people that buy them a day before, a week before, a short period before they're going out and do mass killings, it's outrageous, and they resist even background checks.
Right. I agree here. The problem, though, the counter argument to that is that it's the people that are getting the guns illegally that are committing the crimes and the shootings and the murders, and not the people that are arming themselves pursuant to how those people interpret the Constitution.
That sounds logical. And
Well,
of course, they always say, the NRA says, the best way to stop a guy with a gun is have
is your own gun. Now, I'm not saying that.
No, have a good guy with it.
Right. No, I'm not saying that.
And that doesn't work,
No, I agree. It's the proliferation, the fact that there are so many guns to be had. That's the problem.
And what you're saying is right. Crooks get guns by hook or by crook.
Right.
But not as easily as they get them now. And if we were tougher, they wouldn't get them as easy. They may not get them at all. Because if you look at the history, Australia had a mass shooting in 1995. They went ballistic and changed all the laws, and you can't get a gun now. You got to wait a year. You go through police check.
And
so
here
forth.
you every day you
And we
read the
haven't.
newspaper.
No, we haven't had
Yeah.
another mass shooting till recently. That was from '95 to it's maybe
About 25 years, 25 years, yeah, in Australia. Yeah.
Five.
And here every
26,
day,
yeah.
every day you read the newspaper.
Just
Somebody else.
yesterday, three
Football players, yeah.
you know,
Well, that actually
that actually
dovetails on mental health issues. I mean, there
Oh,
are
that's the NRA mental health. That's bull.
no. What I'm saying is that the wrong people are getting guns, but that's part A. Part B is there's just too many darn guns for these people to get.
That's so much nonsense. Every other people has as many mental
Not
cases.
jobs as-
mental cases as we have, but they can't get guns.
Well, that's
And
what I'm
New
saying.
Zealand-
There's too
New
many
Ze-
guns to be had.
New Zealand had the same experience. They
Right.
don't have any more. We didn't react at all.
Right.
And not only that, after every shooting, this is the most tragic part. The 20 kids that got killed in Connecticut, young kids, 4 or 5 years old, and the teachers, what was it called, Sandy
Hook.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're supposed to be the most civilized
No,
country
but
in the world.
Right following the killing, they had record number of gun sales, and it happens after every one of these
Right.
events. Why? Because the NRA says
Gotta
they're
protect
gonna-
yourself.
No, they're going to come and take away your guns,
Right.
or you won't be able to buy guns in the future.
Right.
It's the biggest windfall for them. So they're encouraging,
Yeah.
terrible. I don't know. Maybe I'm too wimpy and too weak and too, But I don't want to see my kids killed that way. I don't want to see anybody else's kids
No,
killed
but
that way.
now I feel safe disagreeing with you because I know you don't have a gun. You see?
I think you just gave me a motive to get a gun.
Yeah, motive. Right.
Anyway,
Listen.
I think we abused our audience almost enough. We still have 9 minutes to go. So, you want to say something more about this or any other subject, or should we relieve our audience of further? What else did we want to say about guns? Why do we? Here's what Len, the notes that Len gave me. I mentioned the U.S. Constitution grants Congress the sole power to declare war. Congress has only voted to declare war 11 times, with the most recent being during World War II. That's unbelievable.
I think this question is interesting.
As going to, I'll get to it.
Yeah.
Has going to war become easier?
Sure.
Has it? Yeah.
Sure, because again, the global shrinking borders, everybody's a threat. Even if they're thousands of miles away, we deem them as a threat.
And not only that, contrary to the Monroe Doctrine, we have left troops everywhere where
Right.
we won a war. We still have troops in Japan. We still have troops in Germany. There's hardly any place we don't have troops.
Right, they said like anywhere you go in the world, you can find a Chabad house, right? Anywhere in the world you go, you can find an American soldier, you
Right.
know?
Why do we seem to get quagmired in so many conflicts?
So I think that's because we, to our detriment, have a superiority complex. We believe we can save the world. We believe we should save the world.
And we also say it's good.
We're
doing good.
we're doing God's work.
Right. No, but
And-
we're doing good.
Yeah.
Even though in the
It doesn't
process
always turn out that good.
In the process, we're killing
Right.
the quagmires of war. How does the current conflict in Ukraine fit into the way we should evaluate getting involved in conflicts outside our borders?
I think you have to see if
think
it's a
we-
direct threat to us or not.
I think we
Yeah.
dealt with that.
But you have to analyze whether this is a direct threat to our peace and freedom and security or not. Or you have to say we're the world's policeman and
You think that that Ukraine being attacked by Russia was a direct threat to the United States?
no, not at all. Not at all.
Would changing the way we fill the ranks of our armed forces affect how we decide upon and fight wars? For example, should we have a universal draft? So everybody has to go. During the Second World War, that's what made it fair, because everybody went, everybody. And not only that, everybody suffered from rationing. Really, rich people still couldn't get oil, couldn't get butter, couldn't get meat. You had to come with.
We'd have a
rations.
pretty weak army if we would do that, but I think what you're really alluding to is that the populace would rise up.
Why would we have?
Well, I'm saying if you had a universal draft and everybody had to go, you're not having the slimmest, trimmest fighting machine. But if what you're saying is that everybody has to bear the burden of war, then yes, there's a stronger chance that wars will end because those
we had the best army ever
and we
during
still
the
got
Second
kicked.
World War.
Yeah,
It's just the opposite. Right now, we give them bonuses to join.
Right.
It's not that they have this intensity like the Ukrainians have now.
right.
So, who said that we got a better army now than we had then?
No, I'm not saying we do. I'm saying when you call for a universal draft, there still has to be a weaning out of who's qualified
No.
qualified to fight and
We
not.
should have a universal draft. And if you object to killing people, then you work at a hospital. You work at a
Okay,
school.
that's what you
So
mean.
everybody should serve.
Everybody
serve
feels the burden.
2 years. Not only
Right.
feels the burden. Think of all these young blacks, the others too, but overwhelmingly young blacks that have no role model, never learn how to get dressed in the morning or get up at time. You know what a great service it is for them to go to the service and learn something about how you live your life, how do you get a job, how do you...
Right, but when they're sent to the front lines, that's why you have.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But there's other things.
Exactly.
They
Exactly.
could do a lot of services. They could build the roads and the infrastructure.
Yeah.
Here's the final
We
one.
have a caller.
How can we eliminate this barbaric practice of war once and for all? That's in your...
That goes back to what I started.
You're
with.
responsible.
Yeah. It's my fault. It's my fault.
No, you're appointed. I appoint you to the czar.
I'm
to
the
deal with
war
them.
czar. I'm the war czar. You have to root out
The
evil.
peace czar, not the war czar.
Right, you have to root out evil, and until you root out evil, you have to assume that the next person is.
You can't root out evil.
Well, then you have to make
Any-
it so
every
costly.
philosopher-
Right. I'm saying
Every
short of that,
philosopher says
the price of war.
that-
Putin has to pay a price. The aggressor has to pay a price on the world stage, and then they'll at least think twice. But they have to pay a price.
Anna's on. Anna, you better talk quick because we got 3 minutes left.
Hey guys.
Hi,
Hey
Anna.
there. Can you hear me?
Sure.
Hey there.
What's your
Yeah.
issue?
Well, I mean, you guys have touched on so many different things, but I do wish that we.
Well, you got
could
3 minutes. You
get
should be
back
able to cover them all.
A table. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
I do wish we could get to the table to diplomatically engage Russia and Ukraine here. I think there are a lot of people, even in positions of power. I mean, Mike Mullen, who was the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, I can't remember if it was last weekend or the weekend before on the Sunday shows. He was really pushing for diplomatic negotiations. We just can't let this turn into another forever war, which is what we were having, certainly in Afghanistan and Iraq, and no good came of any of that. So it certainly behooves the world at large not to let such a key part of the world be engaged in this sort of hostility.
I don't think
But,
anybody
to
thought it would
your
go
other
on this
point-
long. I thought most people thought that by now Russia would have crushed
Yeah.
Ukraine. And Ukraine has put up
I
a
think they did think that. Yeah. They put up a great fight, but at the same time.
But
they
none of these things that we
clear
can't do.
Indian side.
Did we ever think we'd be
Russia,
20?
by bringing up.
Did we ever think we'd be
Nuclear
20
war,
20 years in Afghanistan? It never. It starts off. We're only going in
Right.
for a few weeks.
a minor incursion, they call
Right.
it.
Minor incursion.
Right. And we stayed there forever. But here's something that just to remind people about the secondary effects of war. In sort of prep for today, I was reading through, and there were, since 9/11, we have lost upwards of 7,000 soldiers in combat, but we have lost 4 times that many soldiers returning from war to suicide. It's like the incredible cost in human. It's just it's barbaric that we send these young people completely unprepared apart from the military training, but like the psychological damage
Yeah.
that all of this inflicts, and then later inflicts on their families, in multiple different ways, and they're also trained in weaponry, and so once, it's just devastating. The other thing that I've been thinking about is the U.S. military right now is one of the world's largest employers and largest polluters. They consume more petroleum and the type of machinery that's used, be it for jets and or tanks, emit greater quantities of greenhouse gases than any other organization on the planet. It's destructive on so many levels, apart from the budget and
Anna, incidentally, probably the largest source of profitability for industry.
Yeah.
It's our biggest import
Yeah.
with the most margin. Anyway,
Okay.
thank you all. Have a
Right,
great
well,
week, and we'll see you in a week. Come next Wednesday, 6:30 to 7:30. Tell your friends about the program. Call in if you get a chance. Write in if you have questions, and I'll be glad to respond. And I love you all. Have a great weekend.
Thank you,
Have
Morty.
a great every day. Bye.